Hello everyone, my name is Don Walmsley and welcome to Meet the Media, a live stream event put on by our local television station, NAC-TV. By live it means that we're able to take questions or comments, so for any questions you might have on our topic today, phone at 204-476-2639 or leave a comment on our YouTube live streaming, which is Nipawin TV. Our topic today is Bill C-18, which is in June was put into legislation. It is the Online News Act. It is stated basically that any people, especially the large distributors like Meta and Google, if they're going to be using Canadian content, they should be paying for it. Joining me today to talk about it at length are two people who are no strangers to the media realm, both print and digital. Both have fairly long histories in it. One of the gentlemen who you'll probably recognize has a very long history in it. And I'm speaking of Ken Waddell, the owner-operator and publisher of the Nipawin Banner Press, and Bill Syrik, who is, among other things, has Creation Station, a media platform that is quite interesting and quite exhaustive. So very informed, both these gentlemen, with regards to our media. So, Bill C-18. Who wants to start? Ken, I'll start with you. Do you have some history on it?
Yes, interestingly enough, history with this bill goes back at least 10 years. Because I was invited to go to Ottawa to appear before the standing committee, the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage, and they were wanting to talk about in that era there was the emergence of the phrase fake news, and everybody was going crazy about it, and they wanted to have a hearing, and it was a large hearing. There was a large number of parliamentarians at that meeting. 3 or 4 other media types were there in addition to myself. And we talked about our experiences with local media. And it was interesting because I remember making the presentation that in order to have reliable news, you had to have it localized. The further away you get from the source, the more chance there is for screw-ups. And so it talked about local, and in a local newspaper, if you make a mistake, you're going to hear about it by 9 o'clock the next morning, and that type of thing. And interestingly, the chair of that committee, well, the vice chair was, now his name has escaped me, Larry Maguire, the MP from Brandon, and the chair was Hetty Fry. And you probably wouldn't get somebody more diametrically opposed politically to me than you would get Hetty Fry, but that's fine. She did a fine job of the meeting. And so I spoke, and there were some questions and whatever. The others spoke, and there were some questions. But immediately after, I was the second last speaker. Immediately after me came a man who was the head, and still is the head, of Facebook Canada. And so he made his presentation about, they fact check, and they do this, and they do that, and we're going, yeah, right. But anyway, Hetty Fry says to, I believe his name was Mr. Chan, says, Mr. Chan, how can you assure the people of Canada and this committee that your news will be as reliable as Mr. Waddell's? And I thought, yes. But anyway, that goes back a long way, and out of that, the Heritage Committee has done a number of things to try and assist media, radio, TV, newspapers, magazines, everything else. And they'd been doing some before that as well. But the whole idea is, how do they try and preserve the news industry in Canada? And out of that meeting and a lot of other meetings came Bill C-18, which, as I understand it, you summarized it quite well, is that there would be a forcing of the Facebook and Google and all these companies to put some of their income, which is substantial, towards the news media outlets from whom they borrow, put that in quotation marks, borrow their copy, they access our news and pay nothing for it. But it goes deeper than that. I'm almost done, Bill. It goes deeper than that, is that Facebook and Google and all these companies pay very little, if any, taxes in Canada. And the money all goes to California or New York or wherever their headquarters is. It doesn't stay in Canada except for the few employees that they have working in Canada. So there's hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of advertising dollars and tax dollars just kind of fly away every year. And so the government, far be it from me to be praising a Liberal government, sorry, but I do agree with the sentiment, at least, of Bill C-18. I've been told by the Conservative Party and our local MP that I'm totally wrong, but I still stand by it. I think that the big companies that benefit from the hard work that we, be it the Glenboro Gazette or the a small paper in Saskatchewan or the Neepawa Banner and Press, that have put into gathering the news, that when they use our news, it cost us hydro, it cost us rent, it cost us gas, it cost us salaries, all the rest of it. There's a cost to putting this together that we should be reimbursed in some small way. And they're saying no, and they've cut off most of the news media outlets in Canada off of Facebook now. You can't access most Canadian news media outlets through Facebook anymore.
Okay, Bill, what your comment on that?
Well, historically, I don't have quite the story that Ken does in regards to it, but it is one of those things where when I did hear about it, I started asking around about it. Now, people on the street, contact CRTC, and read some other stories along the way and whatnot. And in the beginning of it all, it was a chaotic thing, and it was one of those scenarios where when it was being brought forth in the House of Commons and being presented, there was a thought about censorship. There was a thought of how exactly this is going to affect people. And at the time, it wasn't that big of a deal for me, because being Gen X, it was one of those scenarios where, okay, well, don't access social media. We can go through other outlets like we used to before internet, et cetera. But then I started thinking about it. I was like, okay, so Gen X won't affect. Baby boomers won't affect. Gen Y, probably not. But once we start getting into the millennials, Gen Alpha, et cetera, these are the kind of processes where if they want to look into a news story, that's how they do it. So now it's not so much affecting you and I as much as taking a trip down memory lane, as much as it is the alpha generation, where they've never had to experience picking up the local paper or tuning into the local TV station or doing those kind of things. So so it's really interesting to see how it's unfolded to this point. But
so what you're basically saying,
Yep.
we've seen generational differences in terms of the kind of media we access, what we're used to. You spoke about, traditionally and historically, well, since the printing press, we've seen newspapers, we've seen radio, we've seen television. But moving to the high-tech, offline, it's all in a little rectangular box you can carry in your pocket or your purse. That's where the newer generations are looking at. I want to ask you something, and I'll start with you, Bill. There's things going around. For example, in 2021, Australia proposed doing exactly the same thing, but circumstances changed because somehow they worked out some kind of deal. Can you maybe describe, if you're aware, what those differences between what we've done now with legislation and what was happening in Australia?
Okay. Well, what's going on right now is the fact that Canada is the first country that has actually put it to a law. And with that, it's one of the reasons why corporations have gone against this by not including Canadian content in their media distribution. And when you hear about it from the corporations and such, they're turning around and saying Canada's the only country that's turned it into a law, et cetera. And that's not necessarily the case, because other countries are in the process of working towards that. Canada just took a more of an express route to make it happen.
I almost get the feeling, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ken, that because Canada has actually put it into legislation, and the only people that can legislate in Canada is the government. It's we're becoming a bit of a test case because those big corporations, those big media corporations, are afraid of what this may do, because this will set the template for going forward. Because if Canada finds some kind of reasonable resolution to this, other countries are going to assume the same.
I think that assessment's absolutely correct. They're taking a hard stand, they being Google and Facebook, etc., a hard stand because they know that laws, whether they be from country to country or even within a country, are set by precedent. And if there is a precedent set here, they'll have a hard time bucking it in another jurisdiction. Canada, to them, is small potatoes. What they're worried about, of course, is the U.S. market, European market, and probably India and China. But the interesting thing is that I find very ironic about all this is that until this legislation was brought in, Facebook, for example, had side deals with 22 news organizations across Canada whereby they were paying millions of dollars across the whole group, not any one, but all of them together, for their content. I know the Winnipeg Free Press was getting paid. Brandon Sun was getting paid. Calgary Herald, Ottawa Citizen, all these places.
So this isn't new then?
No, they made deals one-on-one with, the larger corporate newspaper entities that maybe have several titles. Or Winnipeg Free Press is substantial, and the Brandon Sun. So they had a side deal there. And I maybe shouldn't say side deal because that makes it sound like it's shady, but it was a side deal in as much as it did not include the local media. Now, probably didn't include the local media because there's 620 some newspapers across Canada. They probably didn't want to have to deal, and probably 450 of them are quite small. They didn't want to deal with 450 different entities. But once this legislation came in, they canceled those deals with the 22 organizations and left them high and dry. And with some of them, it's going to be, and I won't say which, I have an idea which ones are going to be, but some of them it's going to be very brutal to their bottom line. Some of them don't have a bottom line. Some of them are in the red already. And this is just going to really take them down. The investors are going to flee. The share value is going to go down. And it's going to be very, very difficult for them without this money. I don't know if it'll ever come back. I mean, Facebook doesn't have to come back and do this. Facebook is built on the premise that you have a story, you post it. You have a story, you post it. I have a story, I post it. And that's all well and good. If you want to show me your picture of your granddaughter, I'm happy to see it. Then, I'll talk to you next time and talk about your granddaughter or whatever. And that's fine. But there's a lot, it's open season. Anybody can post any damn thing they want on Facebook. And it could be misleading, it could be dangerous, it could be illegal, it could be totally false, and we have no way of controlling that. And Facebook says they've got fact checkers. That's fictitious. They got fact checkers. I think I worked it out. If you took all the fact checkers they have, each fact checker is responsible for about 3 million clients. Well, not going to happen.
That's a pretty big caseload.
Yeah, there's no fact checking really, or very, very little. But when you have local media, even Winnipeg Free Press, which is pretty big, if somebody gets upset with the Winnipeg Free Press, it'll get out in the public pretty darn fast. Probably on the competing radio station, but it'll get out there. Whereas on the internet, there's no accountability. It's a free for all.
Okay, now just check in. You're watching live broadcast of Meet the Media by NAC TV. Questions, you can phone in at 204-476-2639, or you can leave a comment on our YouTube live streaming Nipawin TV. Speaking of which, I have a question. And I'll give this to you, Bill. What is the impact, do you think, of Facebook and Google's decision on us locally?
On the local scene, I like to think the smaller the locality, the less of an impact it really makes.
Okay.
Where it's making an impact is probably in the bigger cities with newspapers and radio stations that have a much larger distribution area. But in a small town like Nipawin, if you don't get your news on Facebook, you're going to hear about it from your neighbors or your friends, or when you go to the hockey game, or something along those lines. Small town stories, travel fast.
Would you concur?
Yes, and if I know, for example, if I want to find reliable news about your granddaughter, I'll go to your Facebook site, right? Or if they want to find out reliable news about town council, they'll maybe pick up a copy of the Neepawa Banner. That won't change. But just that our news about the Neepawa Council won't appear on Facebook.
Okay. So I'll stick with you, Ken. What can we, the public, do to ensure that we can still find local news? I'll just make a note that NACTV has a local news page on their website at NACTV. So you can see our news on our website. But back to the question. What can we, the public, do to ensure that we can still find local news? Or is there anything we can do?
Oh, sure. You can have Facebook contacts, for example, that you know are reliable. I'm sure that your business or Bill's business or ours, for that example, if they don't cut us off because we're news media, they're not going to cut off you or your place of business. They're not going to do that because you're not news media. So that should be reliable. But your local newspaper, your local radio station or Bill's creation station or anything he carries on there, people know where to find me or Bill. If we step out of line, we'll hear about it pretty fast. And not that we'd want to do anything bad or harmful to the public or to an individual, but there is that extra guarantee. If you do, you're going to be in big trouble. Whereas, what are you going to do with Facebook? What are you going to do with some of the bigger news outlets? The big cable TV networks. They screw up. Well, too bad, so sad. There's no accountability.
So, speaking of which, leads me to this other question that came in from the public, and I'll start with you, Bill. What can we do to confirm the reliability of our news source and weed out the fake news? Now, this is a paraphrase, but essentially, reliability of our news sources and weed out the fake news. Is it a population density kind of question, or what?
There's a trust relation when it comes to media. When Ken reports a story in the newspaper, it's factual because he has a history of over 30 years of reporting factual news. Mm-hmm. And in the event that he does something that is incorrect information or whatever, he'll follow up on the following week and turn around and say, there was an error and we apologize, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what a lot of reputable news stories, newspapers and television shows are like. But when you're searching through the internet and you're looking for a particular story, you are going to find 40 different versions of the story, and 38 of them are going to be false. And it's one of those things where you have to, it's almost like a buyer beware kind of scenario, where you're not just going to buy a used vehicle from just any old person off the street nowadays. You want to be able to make sure it's safety. You want to be able to make sure it works for you for what you want, et cetera, things like that. And if you don't know the person, you're not as eager to buy the vehicle as you were from, say, the dealership that for the last 20 years has been in operation. So reputation is a big thing. Knowing where you're getting your local content from is also a big factor. If you're getting Neepawa news reports from the Phoenix Star, chances are it's not going to have as many details or as much truth to it as the local paper or the local station. So it's a buyer beware thing.
So back to the comment that you made in terms of the actual, and you've alluded to the percentage of, I hate to use the term fake news because it's come like a buzzword, but news that isn't accurate necessarily or isn't based on actual fact. Is that going to change at all?
No, I think we're going to be inundated with even more fake news because I don't like that because of the political connotations of it, but incorrect news because there's no way of controlling it. And if they do try to control it, then you are into censorship. As rotten as some of the stuff is you see on the internet, I don't want to see somebody
lose their ability to have free speech. as
that
long
kind
as-
of thing. I mean,
yeah.
there's some horrible stuff on there, but you have the privilege and the obligation to turn it off. You know, there's websites and whatever that if you don't like what's on there, don't watch it.
Well, speak to that, and I have a question I'd like to get to shortly, but are you suggesting then that news has become entertainment? It's
Oh,
like
definitely.
watching a variety show. It's now news is entertainment. It's not really, I'm interested in the news and I'm interested in what's happened and I'm interested in the facts to make my own decision, but I'm entertained by it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the worst thing, one of my chief people works with me, Owen Devereaux, says the worst thing that ever happened to the news industry is the 24-hour news cycle. Like, how do you keep telling something fresh every hour, on the hour, 24 hours a day? Some things just don't change, you know. A bomb fell in Ukraine, 12 people were killed. You can say that 24 times in 24 hours. It doesn't change at all. But they'll try and put a different angle. Maybe that was a poor example, but they'll try and put a different angle on every news story. What does the mother-in-law say? You know, what does the local dog think of this? You know, we'll talk to the fire chief now. Well, the damn building burned down. What more can you say? You know, no lives lost. Hopefully, end of story. But they'll run a story for a day, 2 days sometimes. Same footage.
Yes, and we've seen examples of that. I've got a question. I'm going to split it up a bit. First, for you, Bill, do you think it's more likely that Facebook, Google will pay up, or the Canadian government will back down? I recognize this is your opinion, being put in the spot, but what do you think?
No, I think now that it's become law, it's become a strong stance on it, and there is no immediate solution on this. I think the outcome of it will be other countries are going to be watching to see whether or not they need to do a similar thing, because when it's like one of the things that I'm comparing it to is musicians' royalties. And in Canada, we have SOCAN. In the US, we have BMI, ASCAP, everything else like that, who controls basically the royalty payment structure for musicians and artists and from the venues, etc. And I think Canada wants to try to bring the media coverage into a similar kind of scenario, but because it's new, because it's a radical approach, all that other stuff, it's going to be a slow process. But at the same time, I think other countries are going to look at this, they're going to see the benefits in this, and they're going to start leaning towards the same direction.
And the interesting thing is, when you talk about music, it's a little bit different because the product is genuine. The product's coming from someone. They're very clear about people who plagiarize and that.
But so is the story.
Well,
The
but it's
artist,
harder
the
to,
artist is the writer.
True enough.
Yeah.
True enough. But I'm just thinking there may be some ambiguity in that side. It's harder to get that sense of control, and that will be one of the challenges. Mm-hmm. Second part of the question, if Canada and Google and Facebook reach an agreement where pay does come, do you think Nipawin TV or papers will see any of that money?
Yes, I do. The News Media Canada, which is formerly the Canadian Newspaper Association, as I said earlier, they got about 550 members, some of which include those bigger newspapers too, of course. But they have made application, and they've gathered together sign-ups from their members, and we've signed up to be part of a bargaining group with the big corporations to see if they will come to some kind of agreement. I think there will be an agreement. If the government changes, there's a good chance, though, that the Conservative Party might retract Bill C-18, which I don't think is a good idea. It maybe needs to be modified. I mean, it's pages and pages and pages. I haven't read the whole thing, but I think there will be an agreement. I think there will be an agreement because it's such a strong case. I write it, you steal it, and you sell an ad to support it. It's not right.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I guess when we're taking a look, it is a complicated issue. It sounds straightforward, but there are so many layers to it. There's so many levels that are going to make it challenging. What do you think is the biggest hurdle to begin with, the first one, Bill?
I think the biggest hurdle on this will be how the people actually react to it, because what it's doing right now is it's muddying the terms gossip and news by turning around, and now you don't get your content from Google, from Facebook, from Meta, from all these other big name items. So now you're looking towards other things, and you're going to get the false stories, you're going to get the different viewpoints, and you're going to get the gossip, and you're going to get everything else, and it's all going to be muddied into one big ugly pool.
But let's be clear, it's just Canada's news that's being
It
hacked.
is just Canada's.
Not the US, not Europe, not anywhere else, is it?
Right, that is correct.
Yes, that is right. And I guess from our point of view, strictly a local newspaper, and I've talked to other local newspapers about if Facebook doesn't carry our stuff, and if Facebook doesn't agree to pay and therefore won't carry our items, we don't care. We weren't getting any money out of them anyway, and it will drive more people to our website, picking up our paper, and we may get to a point where we will be charging for an online subscription. Be a small amount, but if you want to see what's happening in this area and you like the variety of news we cover, then okay. If you aren't in a position where you can pick up a paper, if you're outside the coverage area, you buy a subscription.
So you're suggesting that actually it may have a bit of a twist to it, that it could actually enhance or strengthen local news outlets simply because people will be driven more so.
I believe it will.
I have another question that come in. Do any of you know who do the public contact to make their opinion on C-18 known? And to maybe take a look at all the reactions that have come in. Is anybody aware?
You can contact the CRTC.
Okay.
There is a general line where you can call. Offhand, I do not know what that number is, but you can contact the CRTC. You can also contact your local government, and make your voice heard through there. As for the social media, you can try putting in a complaint to Facebook or Meta or Google or whatever. And being a big organization like that, I don't think you're going to get as much traction as you will going through the local MPs or
Going directly to CRTC?
Correct.
Well, gentlemen, we're coming to the end. You've been watching Meet the Media, a live streaming event sponsored by NAC TV, where we've been talking about Bill C-18 that in June was put into legislation, and about the larger broadcasters such as Google and Meta paying actually for news content generated by news journalists and organizations within our country and Canada. It's the first legislation of its kind, and it's drawing some incredible questions, and it's very interesting. So, 15 seconds. What do you have to say, Ken?
We're going to be fine. Our newspaper will be fine because people will come directly to us and won't bother with Facebook in relation to our news.
Okay, Bill.
I think the longer this goes on, the more it will actually harm the Meta, Google, etc., because it will force other people to look for other avenues of news, and as a result, it's going to be something that they're going to get used to.
Yeah, and nature abhors the vacuum. So if that's not there, then other things may come up. Well, thank you all for watching. Thank you, gentlemen, for appearing on this program at short notice, and thank you for your insight based on your experience and your assessments of the situation and your involvement in all sorts of finagling. I appreciate it very much. And thank you to the audience. We're done.